Homeless girl collapsed after saving biker's father. What fell from her pocket exposed everything. The city was already alive with noise. Cars honking, bus engines rumbling, people talking as they rushed to work, and the faint sound of distant footsteps echoing in narrow alleyways. In the middle of all this, a young girl named Leela walked slowly, almost aimlessly, along the edge of the sidewalk. Her coat, patched in several places, hung loosely over her thin frame. It had once been her mother's, but years of wear had left it faded and frayed. Her shoes were old, the soles thin, and they made a soft, scraping sound as she stepped over cracks and puddles. Leela had been living on the streets for many months now. At first, she had thought she could manage on her own, thinking that finding shelter in the corners of old buildings or sleeping under stairways would be temporary. But life had other plans, and she quickly realized that surviving on the streets was harder than she had imagined. Every day was a struggle, finding enough food, staying warm, avoiding trouble, and trying not to be noticed too much. People often walked past her without a second glance, some with pity in their eyes, others with annoyance. Leela had learned to smile politely when she could, hoping for a small coin or a kind word, but mostly she kept her head down, blending into the background. That morning, though, there was a different feeling in the air. The sky was pale, with streaks of soft orange and pink as the sun tried to rise through the clouds. Leela felt a strange sense of alertness, almost as if something was about to happen. She tightened her scarf around her neck and pulled her hood up to shield herself from the wind. The city streets were crowded as usual, but there was a rhythm to the chaos that she understood. People walked in patterns, cars stopped and started, and bicycles weaved between them all. As she walked near a busy intersection, Leela noticed an elderly man struggling on a small motorbike. He looked unsteady, his hands gripping the handles tightly, his eyes wide with fear as the bike wobbled dangerously. A car honked sharply, brakes screeching, and Leela's heart jumped. Without thinking, she dashed forward. Her legs moved quickly, propelled by instinct rather than thought. She reached the man just as the bike began to tilt toward the street. With a swift motion, she grabbed the back of the seat and steadied the bike, using her body to keep it upright. The man's eyes were wide, and he gasped loudly, nearly falling off himself. "Oh my, thank you, you saved me," he said, his voice trembling. Leela gave a small, tired smile. "It's okay," she whispered, though her heart was still racing from the sudden burst of energy. People nearby started to notice, some applauding softly, others just staring in surprise. It was not every day that someone stepped forward so quickly to help a stranger, especially a young girl who appeared so fragile. From across the street, a large figure had been watching the entire scene. Marcus, a tall man dressed in biker leathers, had been on his way to meet his father for breakfast. When he saw the girl steady the bike, his eyes widened. His father, the elderly man now gripping the handlebars tightly, looked shaken but unharmed. Marcus could not believe that someone so small and seemingly powerless had acted so bravely. He crossed the street quickly, his boots clicking loudly against the pavement, and knelt down beside Leela. "You all right?" he asked, his deep voice filled with concern. Leela nodded, though she felt a wave of exhaustion hit her suddenly. The cold, the running, and the stress of the moment all combined, making her knees weak. She tried to smile, but it faltered. I'm fine," she murmured, but the words barely left her lips before her body gave way and she collapsed onto the pavement. Marcus caught her gently, preventing her from hitting the hard ground. "Hey, stay with me," he said, looking around for help. People were gathering now, some taking out phones, others just staring, unsure of what to do. A few kind strangers rushed to bring blankets and water, wrapping Leela carefully to protect her from the cold. Her lips were pale and her hands shook slightly. Marcus felt a surge of worry. She was clearly weak, far more than she let on. He brushed her hair back from her face and whispered softly, "You're going to be okay." Leela's mind felt foggy. The city sounds were distant now, like they belonged to someone else. All she could think about was the sudden rush of adrenaline and the way the elderly man's eyes had looked at her. Grateful, relieved, trusting. It had been a simple act. She had only wanted to help, but now it seemed to have taken more from her than she realized. She shivered violently, and the blanket could not fully shield her from the biting wind. Marcus noticed something fall from her coat pocket as she collapsed. It was small, something folded tightly, and it hit the ground with a soft thud. Without thinking, he picked it up and glanced at it, but his attention immediately returned to Leela, who was still lying on the pavement, trying to steady her breathing. A passerby offered to call for medical help, and within minutes, someone had dialed an ambulance. Leela tried to sit up, embarrassed that she had caused such a fuss, but Marcus gently pressed her back down. "It's okay, you don't have to do anything. Help is on the way." As she lay there, bundled in blankets, Leela thought of her life on the streets. The endless search for food, the nights spent shivering under cardboard boxes, the people who ignored her existence. Yet in this moment, she also felt something unfamiliar: attention, concern, care. The city had stopped around her just for a moment, and she realized that her small act of bravery had made a difference. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics quickly checked her over. They noted that she was weak from lack of proper nutrition and exposure to the cold, but otherwise unharmed. Marcus stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand gently, speaking reassuringly. "You did something amazing today," he said softly. "Not many people would have the courage to step in like you did." Leela tried to respond, but her voice was barely audible. She felt tired, cold, and oddly proud all at once. The crowd that had gathered began to disperse slowly, many casting sympathetic glances at the young girl who had saved a life, and then collapsed herself. Some whispered among themselves about the injustice of life, about how someone so brave could live in such harsh conditions. Others shook their heads in admiration, inspired by her courage. Leela, meanwhile, drifted between consciousness and fatigue, feeling the warmth of the blanket and the presence of Marcus as anchors in a world that often ignored her. As she was lifted gently into the ambulance, Marcus noticed her pocket once more. The small folded object had fallen out and was left on the pavement. He picked it up again, curious and careful. At first glance, it seemed insignificant, just some folded papers, but there was something about the way it was wrapped and worn that made him want to know more. He slipped it into his jacket for safekeeping, intending to return it to her once she was settled and safe. Inside the ambulance, Leela's thoughts drifted. She remembered her childhood, fleeting memories of warmth and laughter, long gone now. She remembered the times she had tried to be invisible, to survive without being noticed, and now here she was, carried into safety by a stranger who had witnessed her courage. It was a strange, new feeling, to be seen to matter even if just for a moment. The ride to the hospital was quiet. Marcus stayed beside her, holding her hand, speaking softly about trivial things to keep her mind occupied. Leela felt a strange comfort in his presence. She did not know his story, but she felt connected to him in that small, urgent way that forms between people who have shared a crisis. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of the small drama that had unfolded on its streets. Yet within those few minutes, a chain of events had begun. Events that would change both of their lives in ways they could not yet imagine. By the time they arrived at the hospital, Leela's eyes were heavy, but she managed a small, grateful smile. Marcus helped her onto a stretcher, careful not to jostle her. Paramedics guided them through the doors, and the warmth inside contrasted sharply with the cold streets she had known for so long. She felt safe for the first time in many months, in the presence of people who cared and a stranger who had stepped into her world not with judgment, but with compassion. As she was wheeled into the examination room, Marcus finally allowed himself a moment to look at the folded papers in his pocket. Something told him they were more than just scraps of paper. They belonged to her story, her life, her struggle. And he knew that one day they would reveal more than just words. They would reveal the truth of the girl who had risked everything to save a stranger on a cold city morning. The ambulance moved steadily through the bustling city streets, its lights flashing softly in the morning. Haze. Leela lay on the stretcher, wrapped in the warm blankets, her body still trembling from the shock and the cold. The adrenaline from saving the elderly man had worn off, leaving her feeling weak and drained. Every muscle ached, and her mind seemed foggy, as though she were moving through a dream. She tried to focus, but it was difficult. Her life had always been unpredictable, but today had been different. Today, she had made a difference. Marcus rode alongside the paramedics, keeping a protective hand near her shoulder. His eyes never left her face. He could see the pale skin, the shallow breathing, and the slight tremble in her hands. "You're safe now," he said softly, trying to reassure her. "Just stay calm. We'll get you checked out and everything will be okay." Leela nodded weakly. She wanted to speak, to tell him that she was fine, that she had survived worse before, but the words caught in her throat. Her body felt heavier than it had ever felt before, weighed down by hunger, exhaustion, and the harshness of life on the streets. The ambulance finally arrived at the hospital. The bright lights of the emergency room were almost blinding after the dim morning outside. The paramedics lifted Leela carefully from the stretcher and guided her into a room filled with the faint smell of antiseptic and the low hum of medical equipment. Nurses moved quickly, checking her temperature, pulse, and overall condition. "She's hypothermic and undernourished," one of them said, glancing at the paramedics. "We'll need to get her some fluids and monitor her for a while." Marcus stayed close, holding her hand gently as she was guided to the hospital bed. Leela tried to focus on him, on the warmth of his presence, but her mind kept drifting to the streets she had left behind, to the cold concrete that had been her bed, to the nights when she had gone hungry, and to the constant struggle just to survive. She remembered the looks of people passing by, some curious, some judgmental, most indifferent. But here in this room she felt something different: attention, concern, and care. It was unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable, but she allowed herself to lean into it, if only a little. While the nurses checked her over, Marcus finally allowed himself a glance at the folded papers that had fallen from her pocket earlier. He unfolded them carefully, revealing a small stack of photographs and letters. The photographs showed a smiling girl, much younger, playing in a garden, attending school, and sitting with a family that was clearly full of love. The letters were folded and worn, some with words barely legible from age and handling. As Marcus read, he realized that they told the story of her life before the streets, the hopes she had, the dreams she pursued, and the hardships she endured. Leela, unaware of Marcus examining her belongings, felt herself drifting in and out of consciousness. Her body was tired, her mind heavy, and the blankets around her felt comforting in a way that she had not experienced in months. She thought about the elderly man she had saved, about the rush of fear and instinct that had propelled her forward, and about how quickly it had all ended with her collapsing. It was as if the world had demanded everything from her in a single moment, leaving her weak but strangely proud. As the paramedics and nurses continued their work, Marcus spoke softly to her. "You did something incredible today," he said. "You saved someone's life. Most people wouldn't even think twice, but you acted without hesitation. That shows a lot of courage." Leela tried to smile, but it was weak. I just did what I had to," she whispered. "Anyone else would have done the same." Marcus shook his head gently. "No, not anyone else. You are special, and you need to know that. Today you showed the world something important: courage, kindness, and strength. That's something rare." The hours passed slowly, with nurses checking Leela's vital signs, giving her fluids, and making sure she was warm and comfortable. Marcus stayed by her side, speaking softly, sharing small stories to keep her mind occupied. He told her about his father, the elderly man she had saved, about how proud he was of her, and about how the city had reacted with awe and admiration at her bravery. Leela listened quietly, absorbing the words, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the blankets and more to do with human connection. During this time, a social worker arrived, having been alerted to Leela's situation. She introduced herself gently, explaining that she was there to ensure Leela received proper care, shelter, and support. Leela nodded politely, still exhausted but curious. She had learned to be wary of adults who spoke in kind tones but had complicated motives. However, Marcus's presence made her feel safer, and she allowed herself to trust the social worker, if only partially. The social worker explained that there were programs available to help young people like Leela, to provide food, shelter, education, and opportunities to rebuild their lives. Leela listened, her mind slowly beginning to process the possibilities. For months, she had survived day by day, never allowing herself to dream too far ahead, afraid of disappointment. But now, as she lay in the warmth of the hospital room, surrounded by people who genuinely cared, she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could change. Maybe she could have a life beyond the streets, beyond hunger and cold. The thought was fragile but beautiful, and she held on to it cautiously. Meanwhile, Marcus had returned the folded papers to her, placing them gently on the bed beside her. "These belong to you," he said softly. "They tell your story, and I think it's important that you keep them. They are part of who you are." Leela reached out and touched them lightly, her fingers brushing against the worn paper. She felt a mix of emotions, pride, sadness, nostalgia, and something else she could not quite name. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, truly seen, for who she was and what she had endured. As the day wore on, news of Leela's heroic act began to spread. People in the hospital and across the city heard about the young girl who had saved an elderly man from certain injury. Some were amazed by her bravery, some curious about her life, and many inspired to help. Volunteers and community members offered support, from food and clothing to guidance and shelter. Leela began to realize that her single act of courage had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined. She had saved a life and in doing so had touched the hearts of many. In the evening, her father, the man she had saved, arrived at the hospital escorted by Marcus. He looked frail but grateful, his eyes welling with tears as he approached Leela. "Thank you," he said, his voice trembling. "I don't know what would have happened without you. You are a remarkable young woman." Leela felt a lump in her throat. She wanted to say something, but words seemed insufficient. All she could do was nod, her heart full of conflicting emotions, gratitude, relief, and an unexpected sense of pride. Marcus remained by her side, his presence steady and reassuring. "You don't have to go back to the streets," he said gently. "Not now. There are people who care, people who want to help you. You've earned a chance to rest, to recover, and to think about the future. You deserve that." Leela looked at him, the weight of her life's hardships pressing down on her, but now tempered with the faint light of possibility. For months, she had believed she was alone, invisible, unworthy of care. But here was someone who saw her courage, her strength, and her humanity, and who wanted to help her build a better life. As night fell over the city, Leela lay in the hospital bed, wrapped in warmth, surrounded by people who genuinely cared for her well-being. She thought about the morning, about the elderly man, about Marcus, about the small papers that had fallen from her pocket, and about the fragile hope now kindling in her heart. She realized that life was unpredictable, sometimes cruel, sometimes kind, but always filled with moments that could change everything in an instant. Today had been one of those moments. The city outside continued its restless rhythm, unaware of the quiet drama unfolding in a small hospital room. Yet within those walls, a story of courage, resilience, and newfound hope was taking shape. Leela, once invisible on the streets, now found herself surrounded by compassion, safety, and the beginnings of a life she had not dared to imagine. Her act of bravery had not only saved a life, but had also opened the door to a future she had thought impossible. For the first time in months, Leela allowed herself to rest completely, her eyes closing with a sense of peace she had rarely known. Marcus and the hospital staff watched over her, ensuring she was comfortable, safe, and cared for. Outside, the world continued in its busy pace. But inside, a young girl who had once been invisible had begun to experience the warmth of attention, kindness, and hope. A hope that promised new beginnings and the chance to reclaim her life. After the events of that morning, Leela's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The small hospital room, which had once felt foreign and intimidating, started to feel like a safe space, a place where she could finally rest, recover, and think without constant fear. Marcus had stayed by her side almost the entire day, speaking gently, making sure she had everything she needed. But even as she lay there, the folded papers he had returned to her pocket seemed to call for attention. She hesitated at first, afraid of what she might uncover, but eventually curiosity overcame her fear. She unfolded the papers slowly, her fingers trembling slightly. The letters were written in a careful, almost delicate hand. They spoke of family, love, disappointment, and hardship. They told the story of a young girl who had once known warmth and safety, but had lost it all through no fault of her own. One letter described a school project she had been proud of, a science experiment she had completed perfectly, and the praise she had received from her teachers. Another described a birthday spent with her parents, the laughter, the small cake, and the promise of a bright future. As she read, Leela felt a lump in her throat. These memories, though distant, reminded her of who she had once been and what she had endured. Alongside the letters were photographs, some faded, some worn at the edges. One showed a smiling Leela in a school uniform, her hair tied neatly, her eyes bright with curiosity. Another captured a moment with her parents, all three laughing, sharing ice cream on a sunny day. Yet another showed her playing in a small park, holding a kite that had flown high above the trees. Looking at these pictures, Leela was reminded of a life she had lost, a life she had been forced to abandon, and yet a life that had shaped her into the courageous girl who had saved an elderly man that morning. As she sat on the hospital bed, reading and looking at the photographs, Marcus noticed the change in her expression. The first moments of hesitation had given way to reflection, and then to determination. "You're going through a lot right now," he said softly, careful not to intrude. "It's okay to feel everything, the sadness, the loss, the hope, all of it is part of you." Leela nodded slowly. She didn't speak, but she felt understood. Marcus didn't just see her as the girl who had saved his father. He saw her as a person, a human being with a story, a life, and a soul that deserved recognition and care. The hours in the hospital passed quietly but meaningfully. Leela underwent a few basic tests to ensure her health was stable. She was given warm drinks, light food, and blankets that wrapped her in comfort. Each small gesture felt monumental to her. Simple things she had taken for granted before now seemed luxurious and precious. The social worker who had introduced herself earlier returned to discuss options for Leela's future. There were programs to help young people like her. She explained, programs for shelter, education, and personal development. Leela listened, her heart slowly opening to the possibility that life could be different, that she could have a chance to rebuild. But even as the hope grew inside her, Leela felt a strange mix of fear and uncertainty. She had been on the streets for months, surviving through instinct and resilience, and the thought of stepping into a structured life again felt both comforting and intimidating. What if she failed? What if the world was not as kind as it seemed now? Her mind raced with questions she could not immediately answer. Marcus noticed her hesitation and spoke gently. "You don't have to decide everything right now. Take one step at a time. Right now, focus on resting, recovering, and letting yourself feel safe. The rest will come in its own time." Later that afternoon, news of Leela's heroism began to spread beyond the hospital walls. A few journalists and reporters had learned of the story from witnesses at the scene. They were curious not only about the act itself, but about the girl who had performed it. Volunteers from local charities began calling the hospital, offering help, guidance, and support. Leela felt overwhelmed by the attention, unsure if she deserved it. Yet at the same time, it was a validation she had never known, proof that her courage and kindness mattered in a world that often ignored people like her. As the day wore on, Leela's energy slowly returned. Marcus helped her sit up, carefully adjusting the blankets around her. "You're stronger than you realize," he said, a gentle smile on his face. "The world may have been hard to you, but today you showed that even in the toughest moments, your heart is brave." Leela looked at him, the words sinking in. She had always believed that her life on the streets had made her invisible, but now she saw that her actions could make a difference, that her presence mattered. The realization was powerful, and it gave her a new sense of confidence. Later, Marcus brought up the photographs and letters once again. "These are part of your story," he said. "They show where you came from, what you've endured, and who you are. Don't be afraid to carry them with you. They're proof of your resilience." Leela held the papers close, feeling a strange mix of emotions: pride, sorrow, nostalgia, and hope. She realized that even though her past had been difficult, it had shaped her into the brave, selfless girl who had acted without hesitation to save a stranger's life. The hospital staff continued to care for Leela throughout the evening, providing her with warm meals and monitoring her health. Marcus stayed with her, offering quiet conversation, reassurance, and companionship. At one point, he shared stories of his father's life, his childhood, and his own experiences, showing Leela that everyone carries struggles, yet everyone also has the capacity for kindness and courage. Listening to him, Leela felt a connection she had not known she could experience, an adult who truly saw her, believed in her, and wanted to help her succeed. As night fell, the hospital room became quieter. The soft hum of machines, the distant footsteps of nurses, and the occasional murmur of voices outside created a gentle rhythm that soothed Leela. She reflected on the events of the day, the accident, her collapse, Marcus's presence, the letters, and the photographs. Each moment had been a turning point, a chance to see her life differently. She realized that courage was not just about grand acts of heroism, but also about facing life, one step at a time, even when the world seemed cold and unforgiving. Suddenly, Leela remembered the elderly man she had saved, Marcus's father. She had only seen him briefly after the accident, but she wondered how he was doing now. Marcus reassured her. "He's fine, thanks to you. He keeps asking about you, wants to make sure you're okay. He's grateful for what you did, and so am I." Leela felt a warmth in her chest. For so long, she had felt alone, abandoned, and unseen. Now she realized that her actions had impacted others profoundly, and that feeling was unlike anything she had experienced before. As she rested, her mind wandered to the streets she had once called home. The cold nights, the hunger, the constant need to stay alert, they had all tested her, shaped her, and strengthened her in ways that many people could never understand. And yet, despite the hardship, she had retained her compassion, her sense of right and wrong, and her willingness to help someone in need. That realization filled her with quiet pride. She was not just a survivor. She was someone who made a difference, someone whose heart and courage could inspire others. The hours passed, and Leela slowly drifted into a peaceful sleep, her body finally finding relief from exhaustion. Marcus remained by her side, watching over her quietly. He knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that Leela had something extraordinary, a combination of resilience, bravery, and heart that would carry her through difficult times. Outside the hospital, the city moved on, unaware of the small yet profound story unfolding within its walls. But inside, a young girl who had once been invisible was beginning to understand her worth, her strength, and the potential for a brighter future. By morning, Leela awoke feeling stronger, more aware, and more determined. The letters and photographs lay beside her, silent reminders of a past that could not be changed but could inform her future. She understood now that her life was not defined by hardship alone, but by the choices she made, the courage she showed, and the kindness she extended to others. Marcus smiled as she opened her eyes, offering her a reassuring nod. "You're going to be okay," he said. "You've shown today that you're capable of incredible things. The world is ready to see that, and I'm ready to help you make it happen." For Leela, that moment marked a turning point. She realized that the streets no longer defined her, that her bravery and compassion had opened doors she never thought possible. And though the journey ahead would have challenges, she knew that with support, guidance, and her own inner strength, she could face anything. Her story was no longer just one of survival. It was one of courage, hope, and the quiet power of a heart willing to act, even in the most difficult circumstances. By the morning after the hospital stay, Leela felt a sense of calm she had never experienced in her life. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the hospital window, casting a warm glow over the room. She sat up slowly, wrapped in the blankets that had kept her warm throughout the night, and looked around. The machines and sterile walls no longer felt intimidating. They now seemed like a space of safety and care. For the first time in months, she realized she could breathe without fear of the cold or hunger, without worrying about where her next meal would come from or whether she would find a safe place to sleep. Marcus was already there when she woke. His presence had been consistent since she arrived at the hospital, and his calm reassurance had been a quiet anchor for her. He smiled gently as he noticed her opening her eyes. "Good morning," he said. "You slept well?" Leela nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Yes, better than I have in a long time," she admitted softly. The words felt strange to say aloud, but they also felt true. Her body was healing, her mind was clearing, and for the first time in a long time, hope was beginning to take root inside her. Throughout the morning, nurses and social workers came to check on her progress. They explained that she was strong for someone who had endured as much as she had, but that she would need ongoing support to regain her strength fully. Leela listened carefully, absorbing every word. She realized that this was the first step toward a life that could be different from everything she had known. The social worker gently asked her about her future, about her goals, and about the kind of life she imagined for herself. Leela hesitated at first, unsure how to answer. For months, she had survived day by day, never allowing herself to dream beyond the streets. But now, faced with the possibility of choice, she felt a flicker of excitement, a curiosity about what life could become. Marcus, noticing her hesitation, spoke softly. "You don't have to figure everything out at once," he said. "This is a journey, and you've already taken the hardest step by surviving and by helping someone else. Everything else can come one step at a time." Leela nodded slowly, realizing that she didn't have to carry the weight of the world all at once. She could allow herself to heal, to rest, and to gradually plan for a future that she had once thought impossible. Later that day, the elderly man Leela had saved arrived at the hospital again, accompanied by Marcus, his eyes filled with tears as he approached her bedside. "I can't thank you enough," he said, his voice trembling. "You saved my life. I will never forget your courage." Leela felt her heart swell with a mixture of pride and humility. She had acted instinctively, without thought of recognition or reward, and yet here was someone whose life she had truly impacted. It was a reminder of the power of kindness, bravery, and compassion, even when the world had seemed indifferent to her own struggles. Over the following days, word of Leela's act and her story spread widely. Local newspapers and social media outlets shared the tale of the young girl who had risked her own well-being to save a stranger. The story captivated people across the city, inspiring acts of kindness, donations, and volunteer efforts to help those in need. Leela, who had once been invisible, now found herself at the center of attention, not for fame, but because of her courage and selflessness. While initially overwhelming, she slowly began to embrace the attention as a tool to create positive change, both for herself and for others who faced similar struggles. The hospital continued to care for Leela, ensuring she received proper nutrition, medical attention, and emotional support. Marcus stayed nearby, offering quiet guidance and reassurance, and the social worker helped coordinate long-term assistance. Soon, a local shelter that specialized in helping young people who had experienced homelessness offered Leela a safe place to stay. She was nervous about leaving the hospital, unsure of what life in the shelter would be like, but Marcus encouraged her. "It's a place to start fresh," he said. "A place where you can rebuild, learn, and grow. You've earned the chance to step into a new chapter." When Leela arrived at the shelter, she was greeted warmly by staff and volunteers. The facility was clean, organized, and filled with other young people who had experienced similar hardships. For the first time, Leela realized that she was not alone in her struggle, and that there were people who genuinely cared about her well-being and her future. She was assigned a small room with a comfortable bed, and for the first time in months, she felt a sense of privacy, safety, and stability. It was a quiet yet profound comfort, a place to call her own, even temporarily. Over the next few weeks, Leela adjusted to her new surroundings. She attended workshops, received tutoring, and began reconnecting with her love for learning, which she had set aside while surviving on the streets. Every small achievement, from mastering a new skill to sharing a meal without worry, brought a sense of accomplishment and pride. Marcus continued to check in, offering guidance and encouragement, and even helped her connect with local mentors who could support her personal and educational growth. Leela began to envision a life where her past struggles did not define her, but instead strengthened her character and determination. One afternoon, while organizing her belongings, Leela came across the photographs and letters that had fallen from her pocket during her collapse. She took a moment to look through them again, reflecting on her journey. The photographs reminded her of the love and warmth she had once known, while the letters spoke of the resilience and determination that had carried her through the most difficult times. She realized that her story was not only about survival, but also about courage, hope, and the ability to make a positive impact on the lives of others. Inspired by her experience, Leela decided to share her story with others. She began speaking at local schools and community centers, describing her life on the streets, the challenges she faced, and the act of bravery that had changed her life. Her story resonated with many, inspiring others to act with kindness, to recognize the struggles of those around them, and to offer support whenever possible. Leela discovered that by sharing her journey, she could help prevent others from feeling invisible or hopeless, just as she had once felt. As the months passed, Leela grew stronger both physically and emotionally. She formed friendships with other young people at the shelter, developed a sense of independence, and continued her education with renewed determination. Marcus remained a constant presence in her life, a supportive figure who had witnessed her courage firsthand and who now helped her navigate a world that was often overwhelming and complicated. Through his guidance and encouragement, Leela learned to trust, to hope, and to believe in the possibility of a brighter future. One day, the elderly man she had saved visited her at the shelter. He brought flowers and a heartfelt note of gratitude, expressing how deeply her bravery had impacted his life and the lives of those around him. Leela smiled, feeling a profound sense of connection and accomplishment. She realized that her actions had created ripples far beyond what she could have imagined, touching lives, inspiring kindness, and demonstrating the power of selflessness. As her life continued to stabilize, Leela began to plan for the future she had once thought impossible. She dreamed of furthering her education, helping others who were struggling, and making a meaningful impact on her community. The girl who had once wandered the streets alone, invisible and overlooked, was now a symbol of resilience, courage, and hope. She had faced unimaginable hardships, yet she had never lost her compassion or her willingness to help others. Eventually, the city recognized Leela's bravery formally, awarding her for her heroism and selflessness. Marcus and the elderly man she had saved attended the ceremony, proud of the young woman who had changed not only their lives, but also the hearts of many others. Leela accepted the recognition with humility, knowing that while the honor was meaningful, the true reward was the opportunity to live a life filled with hope, purpose, and connection. In the evenings, Leela often reflected on her journey, the cold streets, the struggles, the fear, and the moments of courage. She thought about the day she had saved the elderly man, how her body had collapsed afterward, and how a small stack of photographs and letters had revealed the story of her life. She realized that every challenge she had faced had prepared her for this moment, a chance to rebuild, to grow, and to make a difference. Looking back, Leela understood that life was unpredictable, sometimes harsh, sometimes kind, but always full of opportunities to choose courage over fear. Her story had begun with struggle and adversity, but it had grown into a tale of bravery, resilience, and the transformative power of compassion. She had learned that even a single act of selflessness could change the course of a life, both for the person helped and for the person who helped. With newfound determination, Leela committed herself to living fully, embracing every challenge as an opportunity to grow, and using her experiences to inspire others. She knew that life would not always be easy, but she also knew that she possessed the strength, courage, and heart to face whatever came her way. The streets she had once called home were behind her, and ahead lay a future filled with hope, possibilities, and the promise of a life she had once only dreamed of. And so, the young girl who had collapsed after saving a stranger now stood tall, her heart full of courage, her mind filled with hope, and her spirit ready to embrace the bright and promising future she had earned through her bravery, resilience, and unwavering compassion.